This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Supreme Court Justice Bob Orr, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, and one of our favorite journalists, Cash Michaels. Cash last weekend was honored by the town of Cary in honor of his career as a broadcaster, as a writer and editor, and is also a filmmaker, and it was all capped off by the presentation of the Order of the Longleaf Pine. Yes, congratulations.
Thank you much, and thank you very much for taking part in the celebration.
Well deserved. Mm-hmm. Well, this week's show promises to have lots of discussion as we review the hot mess we've got over the separation of powers between the governor and the legislature. We're also going to talk about the proposed boycott of North Carolina by the NAACP and a brouhaha over craft beer distribution. Plus, as always, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get to it. When our legislature met in special session in December, they hastily passed Senate Bill 4, a law calling for the merger of the State Ethics Commission and the State Board of Elections, wiping away the governor's authority to appoint the new board. Governor Cooper sued, and a three-judge panel stayed the order. The Court of Appeals reversed the stay, but then the Supreme Court came back and reinstated it. Justice Bob Orr, we've got what appears to be a hot mess with a three-judge panel this past week considering three separation of powers issues, including that merger we talked about with the Ethics Commission and the State Board of Elections, the requirement for confirmation of cabinet appointments, and the number of exempt hires the governor can make. At the time we recorded this program, we have to say the judges had not issued an order, but what does that say to you? Are they struggling to reach a decision, or they just want to get it right? What's going on with that?
I think there's several points to consider in the judges taking their time and issuing a decision. First, even if you consider all of the experience as lawyers and judges that these three judges have, I guarantee you this is the first separation of powers case they've ever had. So they're taking their time with a fairly unique set of constitutional principles. In addition, this obviously consists of issues that have a very hot political overtone to them. They know that the case is going up to ultimately the Supreme Court, and so they want to make sure they take their time and try and get it right. And finally, I want to point out that I think the three-judge panel concept for dealing with state constitutional issues has worked really well. They're from three different parts of the state. The judges are having to collaborate on the decision, and I think that's worked very well.
Chris, one of the things that I found interesting about this hearing is that one of the judges asked the legislative lawyers, about the intent of the legislature in passing these bills. Mm-hmm. In fact, commenting on the fact that it seemed kind of strange that they were passed in December, just before a Democratic governor was going to take place. Now, the legislative lawyer said intent wasn't the issue here, but is there any question about what happened?
No, I don't think so. Remember, this was a special session that wasn't even announced. They were here to meet for hurricane relief. They adjourned the hurricane relief session. They quickly convened another special session and did a lot of this power grabbing. There were a lot more questions asked of the attorneys for the General Assembly. I think it's worth noting, and Justice Orr pointed out the three-judge panel, which was appointed by the Republican Chief Justice. It's a split panel. There's a Republican appointee by Governor McCrory and two Democratic appointees from, I think, actually Governor Hunt. So there's a lot of bipartisan things at stake here, and I think that I do have confidence the judges are going to rule on the Constitution and not just on partisan
Well, John, the lawyers representing the legislature said intent wasn't the issue here.
Right.
What their intent was didn't matter.
That is correct.
They could not adjudicate political questions, and these bills were political.
That is absolutely correct. The intent of the legislature is not at issue. The legislature could be entirely partisan in their actions. They could have decided to do it to McCrory previously, but then at the last minute decided not to, and then decided this time to do it. It doesn't matter. The question is it constitutional or not? I think that is absolutely right, and the judge asking about that a number of times was troubling. It was very troubling.
Well, obviously, it's a point of consideration so far as the judges are concerned. Bob, you look like you want to make a comment on that.
Well, I think the intent question may have been more focused on the third issue, which dealt with changing the number of exempt political appointees and whether they could consider, whether the court can consider the intent in that regard.
Cash, last week we talked about all the constitutional amendment bills that have been filed in the legislature. Well, we got another one on tap now. Lawmakers are considering taking the appointive powers away from the governor in naming district court and superior court judges as replacement judges. What's your take on this?
Well, I believe I saw one lawmaker who supports that say on the record that we know these judges better than the governor does, therefore it's only natural and fitting that we do it. I don't.
They aren't judges at the time because they hadn't been appointed; they're attorneys.
Right, but you know, it stands to reason that this is a power grab, plain and simple, and our lawmakers simply aren't paying attention to what this looks like outside of Jones Street, and it's going to bite them. It's going to bite them.
Is it they're not paying attention or they don't care?
Well, I thought one of the most interesting quotes, Representative Justin Burr said, that Governor Cooper didn't carry my area. He didn't win in our area. Our area is more conservative, so we should have the right to appoint the judges. Take that out to its logical extension. So anything that we should have a Department of Transportation just for the Republican areas, or if McCrory, I mean, it's one of the more absurd quotes I've heard in Raleigh in a long time.
You've just given them some very interesting new ideas that they will be working on in the coming weeks.
Exactly.
Well, it only deals with district court judges.
Right. Correct.
Constitutionally, the governor appoints Superior Court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court vacancies. And district court judges, under the Constitution, the appointment process is as the General Assembly shall provide. It may not be a good idea, but I've got some reservations about whether it would be unconstitutional.
With so many proposed constitutional amendments being considered this time, a lot of people believe it's time to review the entire document. If you remember last week, Joe Mavretic, former House Speaker, said that every generation should review the social contract, which is essentially what the Constitution is, between the government and its people. It's been 46 years since that had happened. John, in your opinion, is it time to have a review?
Yes, in fact, Bob Orr and I have decided together that we will conduct that review. Actually, I'm only a little bit kidding. Not that we would do it, but it's easy to say we should review and rewrite the Constitution until you start thinking, well, who's going to do it?
Yeah, well, I was getting ready to say.
And that's where the rub comes in. And I think that in this current environment, with so much disagreement across the parties between the executive branch and the legislative branch, local governments versus the state, a process to lead to reviewing and rewriting the Constitution would itself be highly controversial.
And it would have to go to the legislature for approval, and the people that I've talked to that are opposed to it say they don't want the legislature involved in rewriting a Constitution, Cash.
You know, we got ourselves into this mess. And you're exactly right. How we get out is up in the air. And yet, something must be done because we're going to ruin ourselves.
Well, we're just doing piecemeal amendments to the Constitution, and some of them have impacts on other parts of the Constitution.
Well, but I think we shouldn't jump ahead of ourselves. Not many of them are passing. I mean, it's one thing to introduce constitutional amendments, a lot of which are introduced every session, maybe more lately. But remember, they have to pass with a supermajority in the legislature, and then they have to pass by the voters.
So far, we haven't. It's 3/5 in the legislature.
And we haven't seen a giant. I mean, I think we probably do need to review the Constitution at some point. This may not be the time because of the hyperpartisanship, but we haven't amended the Constitution that many times, which I actually think is a good thing because there's a high bar to do that.
All right. Have you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle? It's easy. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. While you're there, you can view the latest NC Spin show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State at ncspin.com, NCSpin on YouTube, or on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. After these messages, we're going to talk about a boycott of North Carolina.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I hear it all the time. Rising health care costs are squeezing North Carolina families. Deductibles continue to climb, prescription drug prices are skyrocketing, medical bills are unknown until they arrive in the mail, and premiums are increasing by double digits. This is decimating family budgets. We should be focused on education and jobs, not EpiPen cost and medical bill errors. We need quality, affordable, and transparent health care for our families.
North Carolina is a great state with great assets.
Among them are 180,000 state employees.
Our legislators are considering important decisions regarding working conditions, health insurance,
retirement benefits,
and pay for state employees.
Scenic is the one voice at the table when those decisions are being considered.
Scenic is revitalized and refocused.
A stronger Scenic ensures a more effective voice.
Learn more at www.scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
Governor Cooper says the citizens of North Carolina are tired of hearing about HB 2, but there's no progress being made over a repeal. Reverend William Barber and the state NAACP have called for a boycott of our state and hope that it will prompt some action there, both over HB 2 and over racially gerrymandered districts. Cash, the NAACP didn't elaborate how this boycott's going to be conducted. Supporters say it's going to force the hand of the legislature. Some are saying it could bring even more economic distress to our state. What's your understanding about this boycott?
There's an old saying that if you want to get a powerful man's attention, mess with his money. And that's what the NAACP is doing here. They believe strongly that we have a legislature that is out of control, that is looking for opportunities to exert its power anywhere it can, even beyond previous years. And that since technically there's a boycott against North Carolina already, without the NAACP saying or doing anything about it, then why not simply join the party and ratchet up the pain, so to speak, to make the leaders in the legislature understand that the people want government. They don't want power play. Now, to be accurate, a boycott has been called for, but technically it can't happen until the national NAACP, because they've set up a committee to go through this, and I believe with Justice Orr here, he could probably explain to us legally, they have to be very careful because of federal law as to how they carry this out.
Well, they did this in South Carolina, did they not, Chris, over the flying of the Confederate flag. How did that turn out? I mean, how did it work?
Well, I think it hurt South Carolina for a while, and then actually Governor Haley took the flag off the Capitol grounds after the horrible shooting at Emmanuel Baptist Church, a couple summers ago. What's interesting about this, two things. First of all, Cash is right. In one hand, we are being boycotted. We're in the middle of losing dozens of NCAA championships over the next 6 years if they don't figure out a way to repeal HB 2. I'm actually fascinated that gerrymandering, which for so long the court said is okay on political reasons, there's actually a lawsuit making its way through the courts that challenges the constitutionality of that for partisan reasons. The state of North Carolina asked for that to be dismissed. The Court of Appeal said no, a panel did. So there's a lawsuit proceeding now that actually may, I hope, put an end to gerrymandering.
But John, if they were going to do an economic boycott, how would that work? Would they just tell people don't buy stuff in North Carolina?
No, we saw it in the South Carolina case and in others. Boycotts usually fail. They usually fail as political devices to force action. Sometimes they work, they usually fail. Why do they fail? Because most people make their decisions when they buy things, travel, consume goods and services, based upon the needs that they have and the costs and so forth. So boycotts tend to be difficult to sustain. They're not large enough to affect. Even the HB 2 boycott as an economic matter is not large enough to compel North Carolina to do anything. Their leverage is really the sports leagues. That's where the leverage is. It's not economic damage, which comparatively speaking for the economy as a whole is pretty small.
Bob, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is that the Trump administration has dropped the lawsuit that the Justice Department had started under President Obama regarding Title IX and essentially discrimination cases. Some groups are still saying that they're going to pursue that lawsuit, however, but does that weaken the case for people who are trying to, one way or another, ruling on HB 2?
It does, because the lawsuit was premised on an interpretation of the word sex in a federal regulation so that it included transgenders, and the Trump administration has said that interpretation is withdrawn, so that's an open question. But I've got to throw in here, sports is the big club. If all of a sudden the PGA decided they weren't bringing the golf tournament or the Wyndham to North Carolina, that would have some influence. But in all due respect to Reverend Barber, the ACC tournament, the PGA golf tournaments will have a lot more influence than the boycott.
Yeah. John, last week the Supreme Court refused to hear the case of a Virginia teen over Title IX and his ability to be able to use the boys' bathroom, and returned it to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, where it's to be massaged and tried there. It appears to be opening this case up all over again. What can we expect from the Fourth Circuit?
I don't think that was at all surprising. It was really mandated by the fact that the Trump administration withdrew the Obama administration's interpretation of Title IX, which, by the way, wasn't even a regulation. It didn't go through the proper channels as a regulation. It was just in a letter, an advisory letter that was being used as a club, and it was also being cited in this case. Once that was removed, there is still an argument. I mean, the folks who want to change the bathroom access in I think it's Gloucester School District and of course in North Carolina, they're making their own argument that Title IX applies. But it was more helpful when they could cite the Justice Department on their side. When that was withdrawn, the case had to go back.
I want to ask Cash and Chris this. WRAL-TV reported a week or so ago that a major industrial prospect was willing to locate in Wake County and bring 1,500 high-paying jobs. We're told the average was like $100,000 a year, but only on the condition that HB 2 was repealed. A lot of people are just calling this blackmail. What's your response to it?
Well, yeah, people can call it anything they want, but what's been left out of this discussion is that corporate America, and we can include our sports industry as well, they don't want to be associated with any kind of discrimination whatsoever. None. It costs them money. Transgender people spend money. Those who are homosexual spend money. You know, people of color spend money. And they have learned that discrimination is bad for business. And so you may have actually very conservative heads of these corporations, and yet, because it's a proven fact that they know that it costs them money to get anywhere near it, they'd rather call for a repeal of HB 2.
Could this be effective, Chris?
Well, I think it's pretty effective when you lose 1,500 jobs that pay $100,000. You know,
but it's not confirmed. Well, although some legislators said they had heard wind of this.
But there's also, you know, businesses make decisions on where to locate for a lot of reasons. If things are equal, if you were going to go to a state, if you're going to go to Virginia or North Carolina, and Virginia didn't have that law, I think that it's a legitimate reason. We saw a business now come to Charlotte and go to Richmond last spring, or maybe it was last summer, with 732 jobs, and they specifically cited HB 2. So those threats are real. The question is, what's the General Assembly going to do about it?
All right, we're going to take a break, and after these messages, talk about a brouhaha over beer distribution.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
The growing craft beer industry in our state wants to expand their production, but a state law requires if they produce more than 25,000 barrels a year, they must market their product through established beer distributors. They want to raise that cap of 25,000 and do away with the middleman, but a story published in the Charlotte Observer says the NC beer and wine wholesalers contributed over $1.5 million to legislators and are blocking the raising of the cap. John, this is particularly aimed at you as a teetotaler. I want you to blow the suds off this issue and give us your take on this brouhaha.
Tom, I don't think I approve of your taste in puns, but
they get worse.
I'll take a big gulp and get into the issue. First of all, I think it is not appropriate. I think it's unfair to say the beer and wine wholesalers, that organization, its head Tim Kent and others, are simply buying votes, that it's all about how much money they spend in politics. They have spent decades building a case, making an argument that consumer prices and access is not the only issue, that controlling the sale of alcohol while also allowing the sale of alcohol is some kind of sweet spot. Now, you can tell I'm making an argument I don't believe. I'm just trying to explain the fact that they do really believe it, and they do have some.
But Cash, a lot of people are saying
some support for their position, but I think it will crumble.
A lot of people are saying this is pay to play.
It smells like it. It looks like it.
And you're going to say it's going to taste like it?
Probably. I mean, unless they have a better argument for why it's not, I don't see why people shouldn't believe that.
All right, but going back to a point John made, Tim Kent, who's head of the NC Beer and Wine Wholesalers, and most of us know, and he's a friend of ours, says we have the largest craft beer industry of any southern state, and that there's no reason to change a system which has worked well and, in fact, has helped particularly these small craft brewers in being able to market their products more efficiently than they could do themselves. Bob, your comment on that?
Well, there's some accuracy in that, but it's an economic liberty issue. And John and the more conservative folks, as well as those of us who like craft beers, should see the unfairness of the fact that a craft brewery that gets to the point where they can produce more than 25,000 barrels of their product now have to turn everything over from a distribution standpoint to a wholesaler. They essentially
over 25,000.
Over 20, but they have to turn everything over. So no longer can they individually distribute their product with their label that they've gone into it. They've got to turn it over to the wholesaler.
But Chris Tim says this is a protection issue essentially for a lot of the small craft brewers who don't make that many barrels of beer, particularly in the eastern part of the state.
I'm not sure I understand the logic of that, actually, because they can still operate the same way. It just means that when somebody gets big, because there's some breweries now in Asheville that are booming, and I'm sure that want the freedom to distribute their own product. It is fascinating that the conservatives are on one side opposing these limits and thinking it's a bad idea, and you have very progressive legislators like Pricey Harrison, who's sort of on the left side of the political spectrum, who's also very interested in removing these caps. So I think the beer and wine wholesalers have an awfully hard case to make.
All right, I want to go around the table. We've got 30 seconds left in this segment. What do we expect from the legislature, John?
I think that it will be a hard slog, but I think ultimately these regulations will be lifted.
I noticed you
Cash on the barrelhead will not work.
Chug-a-lugging that issue. Bob Orr, what do you think the legislature is going to do?
If it's lifted, it's reluctantly and with some sort of compromise figure in place.
Cash.
I think money talks. They'll get what they want.
All right.
I agree with Justice Orr. I think they'll take the limits off, but they may not eliminate them completely. There'll be some compromise.
All right. We're taking a break. After that, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
North Carolina is a great state with great assets.
Among them are 180,000 state employees.
Our legislators are considering important decisions regarding working conditions,
health insurance,
retirement benefits,
and pay for state employees.
Scenic is the one voice at the table when those decisions are being considered.
Scenic is revitalized and refocused.
A stronger Scenic ensures a more effective voice.
Learn more at www.scenic.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
I was in a restaurant just this week and somebody said, "Tell me something I don't know." I said, "That's not my job, that's the panelist's job." Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
There was a study that came out this past week from the, I think it was the Children's Law Clinic at Duke University about our voucher program, and it got a lot of attention for the poor performance of voucher students, even though we don't have a lot of information because they aren't required to report. But what I thought was the most fascinating is there was a chart in that report that showed that our voucher program, our Opportunity Scholarships program, is the least accountable in the country in terms of teacher qualifications, standardized testing, and a series of, they have this great chart of all the other states that have vouchers. We don't have any of the accountability measures that these other states have. And I think it sort of adds fuel to even some people who support the voucher program. I don't think it's a good idea, but if you do, surely we need some accountability measures to make sure our tax dollars are spent correctly.
Interesting. Cash Michaels, tell us something we don't know.
It was exactly 1 year ago this weekend, March 11th, 2016, when I was diagnosed with acute leukemia, blood cancer. And I've said it on this program before, I'll say it again. Thank God for the extraordinary doctors and nurses at UNC Rex. And I was able to indeed go into remission. And hopefully I'm staying that way. So it's a date that will burn in infamy as far as my life is concerned.
One of the things about that always impressed me was your indomitable positive attitude.
Okay.
I mean, you were just decided from the get-go you were going to fight this thing. Bob Orr, tell us something we don't know.
Ray Starling, Chief of Staff for Senator Tillis, was recently named Special Assistant to President Trump for agriculture and farm issues. He's probably now the highest ranking North Carolinian in the Trump administration, and a great guy. He went to law school at UNC, clerked for Chief Justice Martin. He is a farmer, a great North Carolinian, and we're lucky to have him.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, imports and exports together make up well over $80 billion worth of economic activity in North Carolina. That's 16% or so of the entire economy, which is a little bit above the national average. I hope that Trump administration that Ray Starling is in doesn't screw it up.
So you're telling us something we don't know? Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.